Interaction SQL injection. Nowadays, web applications are common around the world. Nearly every major company or organization has a web presence. Maximum of these companies or organizations use the application to provide various service to users. Some of these web applications offer database-driven content. The big database often contains confidential and sensitive information such as security numbers, credit card numbers, financial data, and medical data. Typically, the web users supply information such as username and password, and web application receive user requests and interact with the backend database and return relevant data to the user. SQL injection is a technique like other web attack mechanism to attack data-driven applications. This attack can bypass a firewall and can affect a fully paged system. The attacker takes the advantage of poorly filtered or not correctly escaped characters embedded in SQL statement into parsing variable data from user input. The attacker ingests arbitrary data, most often a database query, into a string that eventually is executed by the database through a web application. Through a SQL injection, attacker can obtain unauthorized access to a database and can create, read, update, alter, or delete data stored in the backend database. Currently, almost all SQL databases such as Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, MS SQL Server, Microsoft Access are approximately vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. In its most common form, a SQL injection attack can give access to sensitive information such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, or other financial data. Why will SQL injection? This is because you can identify injectable parameters and the database type and version. Furthermore, you can discover database schema and extracting data. After that, you can insert, modify, or delete data. Moreover, SQL injection is denial of service to authorized users by locking or deleting tables. You can also use SQL by passing authentication and privilege escalation. Finally, SQL can execute remote commands by calling store functions within the DBMS, which are reserved for administration.
Do you know why technique from SQL injection very helpful for hacker to destroy someone's website? Firstly, because for common execution. An attack method used to exploit website by performing operating system commands by manipulating application inputs. When the input provided by the user is not cleared by the web application properly before using the application code, it is likely that the web application can manipulate the application to carry out the command operating system. Command execution will be carried out according to the same provision as the components that perform the commands such as web server, web application server, database server, and so on. It is some database. User can using a database server, and if it's like this, the hackers can attack everything in your website easily. Next, modify data. Do you know how easy for hackers to make changes to the data stored in the database? So in addition to deleting the data, hackers can also make it invalid. If at any time the database is changed by an irresponsible party, then you need to prepare a backup first before the event. Also, delete data. In SQL injection crimes, hacker may be able to delete all data in the website's database, and if that happens, it will be very dangerous for website owners who do not have backup. Therefore, do not forget to do backups for data security purposes periodically. Furthermore, information thief. All the information on the website may be retrieved by hackers who find security gaps, especially personal information that should not be known to others, such as passwords and usernames. Last but not least, authentication bypass. This attack technique allows attackers to log into applications with administrator permissions without using a valid username and password. To be able to get access to the websites, hackers simply bypass authentication to successfully enter the system. So there is no need to use the correct username and password to access it. The hacker only need to enter a form that is still open with an SQL injection script that has been prepared.
Right now, I want to show you 4 types that hackers use to extract data from your SQL server via SQL injection. First, a tautology. This attack aims to inject code on one or more SQL command lines and execute it with the correct value. Attackers aim to gain access to data extraction and bypass authentication mechanism. In addition, the attackers inject queries that are always rated true for entries in the database to bypass validation, identify injectable parameters, or extract data. Hence, there are also invalid queries intended to extract data, fingerprints, and identify parameters that can be injected. Also, attackers gather important information about the type and structure of the final database of a web application by injecting invalid or illogical SQL syntax that will cause the application to return a default error page that often exposes vulnerable parameters or injection to the attackers. This attack is considered an initial step, gathering information for other SQL injection attack. Union queries aim at extracting data and cutting validation. The attackers inject union select to trick the application into returning data from a table that is different from the intended table. Here is a comment from that uses a citation for this attack like normal SQL. Next, about piggyback queries. Aims to execute remote commands, perform those attacks, modify or add data and perform data extraction. The attacker injects additional queries into the original query to extract data, add or change data, perform denial of service, or execute remote commands. In this scenario, the attacker does not intend to change the original intended query, but to insert any query that returns the original query. As a result, the DBMs receive many SQL queries. The first is a normal question that is run normally, while the text question is executed to satisfy the attack. Store procedure is when a regular SQL statement is created as a store procedure. An attacker can inject another store procedure in place of the usual store procedure to perform privilege escalation, create denial of service, or execute remote commands.
How SQL injection works. Firstly, the research stage where the attacker makes an advanced observation of the application or website of the target by sending various values that are not included in the input argument. Then study the response given and determine the target is suitable or not to be insert SQL injection. Secondly, the attack stage is carried about when the investigation of the vulnerability of the application or website is completed. The database will be used to execute commands made by the attacker. Now I can show you what is example for SQL injection. SQL injection examples. Number 1, Retrieving hidden data is where you can modify an SQL query to return additional results. Number 2, subverting application logic is where you can change a query to interfere with the application's logic. Number 3, union attacks is where you can retrieve data from different database tables. Number 4, examining the database is where you can extract information about the version and structure of the database. Number 5, blind SQL injection is where the results of a query you control are not written in the application's response. I also have some examples that how they use the SQL injection on someone database. Number 1, SQL injection based on 1 = 1 is always true. Look at the example above again. The original purpose of the code was to create an SQL statement to select a user with a given user ID. If there is nothing to prevent a user from entering wrong input, the user can enter some smart input like this, user ID, then the SQL statement will look like this. Select from user where user ID equal 105 or 1 = 1. The SQL above is valid and will return all rows from the users table since 1 = 1 is always true. Does the example above look dangerous? What if the user's table contains name and password? The SQL statement above is much the same as this. Select user ID, name, password from users where user ID equal 105 or 1 = 1. A hacker might get access to all the usernames and passwords in a database by simply inserting 105 or 1 = 1 into the input field. Number 2, SQL injection based on equal is always true. Here is an example of a user login on a website. A hacker might get access to usernames and password in a database by simply inserting or into the username or password text box. The code at the server will create a valid SQL statement like this. As a result, the code is valid and will return all rows from the user's table since equal is always true. Number 3, SQL injection based on batch SQL statements. Most database support batch SQL statement. A batch of SQL statements is a group of 2 or more SQL statements separated by semicolons. The SQL statement below will return all rows from the user's table, then delete the suppliers table. Example, select from users drop table suppliers. Look at the following example. Example, tst user ID equal get request string user ID tst SQL select from user ID users where user ID equal plus tst user ID, and the following input user ID, the valid SQL statement would look like this.
Conclusion: we have classified circular injection attack that can be proved fruitful against the act of malicious intruders. This can help in fixing or at least reducing the possibility of occurrence of vulnerability that can damage the database security. A detailed study of each attack is being done in order to categorize the secure injection attack. With the help of these categories, industries, experts and developers can bestow more security to database of web applications. Secret injection attacks are growing criminal threat to your web applications, especially those that access sensitive data. Where are the best place to invest your resources? Some techniques, such as secret coding, are wise practices that benefit your application in related ways, such as improved performance and readability. Other defense require much greater investment in deployment and support and should be used only on the most important or sensitive application. Thank you.